welcome to We're Not Wizards. We are the best, but not wizards. Enjoy the show!
Hello and welcome to another episode of We're Not Wizards. My name's Richard. I'll be your host for May I start by saying that this is a very, very exciting time because they say, okay, look at it this way. There are certain people that you interact with in the kind of this kind of space, in this kind of tabletop kind of board games kind of space. And they're always there. And they always reply, and they're always polite, and they're always professional. And they're usually the person that says, yes, we've got you down to look at this, or could you help us with this? Or they send you kind of little kind of press releases and stuff like that. And while the show, we do obviously concentrate on the designers and the developers and the Kickstarters, we do have kind of like media people on as well. So I wanted to bring on somebody who is maybe at the core of this. Or maybe not at the core of this. You could say maybe that they're not core, but they're more coreless. And they're not just here. They're not. I want you to kind of put your hands together and pray. Maybe even Osprey, because from Osprey Games, I've got Benji Corless.
How do I dignify that? I don't know. That's quite an
show over. So thanks for joining.
Incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
No, it's as I say, it's kind of like we've been having a long discussion in the green room, but
I'm colorblind.
There are people that well, it's the puce room. Okay, it's the indigo room. Okay, so if you had a room and you had one core color, what color would it be?
I would probably have one black room. I would have one dark room. I would have the dark room. I would have the dark room. I'd have my mind. Yeah. What's his name? John, the guy who tours Darkroom. That's what I would have. I would have his space. Have you seen that show?
No.
There's a guy who does UK Games Expo every year. His name's, I want to say John Ronson, but it's not Ronson. I'm going to kick myself after this when I remember.
I'm going to, there's people now, it's like, they're currently screaming.
Yeah, but he does like a choose your own adventure mud game at Expo every year, called The Dark Room.
So it would be a dark room. See, I'd be indigo, because indigo's. Oh, you're like okay. Well, we can stop. We can continue. No, Google. Like we've got to look. Here he goes.
Yeah, but you help yourself.
But you've got
the
to.
reason. I'm so okay. I was kicking myself. It's John. Now I'm gonna have to make sure I get it right. It's John Robertson. We can just cut this right in.
No.
Right? John Robertson. I just said it. Great.
Get it. And now I've got it. And now what I'm going to do is at the beginning of the show, I'm just going to have you repeating the name John Robertson straight for the first 30 seconds of the show when it comes on. And then anytime you mention anybody else's name in the entire show, I'm going to cut it in and just have you say John Robertson. So the designers of General Orders, John Robertson and John Robertson. And he's going to be like, and meanwhile he's sitting, probably having his dinner at this time, scrolling through the internet, and all of a sudden his right ear just goes on fire because he realizes that we've been talking about him. How long have you been at Osprey for? I mean, trying to bring this back into some kind of sensible kind of order.
That's fine. You're going to have to wrangle me because I will wonder. I've been there for 2 years. I've been at Osprey. Oh. I started about a year into the pandemic, just as we realised that the pandemic was well and truly upon us. Mm-hmm. That's when I joined.
And where did you come? Let's do this in kind of reverse, because what we like to do in the show is we like to have a little glance back at the past. We like to have a look at the marketing copy of the present before we have a look at our future plans of the future on our multicoloured Excel spreadsheet. that I am disgusted that you don't have. You got to have the color lilac in your Excel spreadsheet, otherwise you just have to go home.
As long as you double code it, I'm fine. Double code your spreadsheets, folks. Colors and symbols, everything should have both.
Yes, for color blindness. There you go.
Yeah,
that's the reason. Okay, okay, all right. So you quite, because that's twice you've mentioned color blindness. So you quite badly kind of colorblind.
I'm not severely colorblind, but
right.
I've got a moderate level, enough that everybody at work has a bingo card that whenever I mention it, it gets crossed off a bingo card for me.
Really?
But it's a big thing. I think for me, accessibility is a big thing, and that's one of my little inroads. Like that's a thing that I know about, so I become a bit of a vocal like advocate for that in the office to be like, we should double code stuff. There are people who can't see. If you put this red next to this green, you're not going to see it. And like I think there's quite a lot of people who don't realize how important that is, because there's a high percentage of people who are colorblind.
And interestingly, it kind of am I right in saying it's a higher percentage of kind of males that have the colorblind kind of deficiency?
Yeah, and obviously board gaming and tabletop gaming in general skews male, so it tends to be more gamers.
Yeah, I do remember there being a huge kind of everybody standing up and almost doing like that Meryl Streep applause gif when I think it was Bungie announced that they were introducing kind of like an entire range of kind of, I think it was like different kind of colorblind settings.
Yeah.
And a lot of people went, this is wonderful, this is advanced. And other people went, it's 2014 people, why haven't we had this since the kind of why haven't we had this since we've been able to have so many kind of colors. Let's go back when you were growing up and young. I don't know if you were just like rolled off the production line when you were 25 year ones, young ones. Were you like a creative kid? Were you kind of like into your Lego? Were you kind of like, you know, drawing your art and stuff like that? Or was that creativity something that you grew into? Because I know some people that they don't kind of find their jam until they kind of find themselves a little bit older. So where were you in that kind of scale?
That was definitely me. I'm very much a creative adult. That's me all over. But as a child, I couldn't pick up a pen or a paintbrush. I was absolutely dreadful. I hated it. And there was a point where that sort of crossed over, where I discovered that actually I don't need to be able to accurately represent something with a pencil. Yes. What I can do is take a picture of it, or use a lens to do a thing, or work in a more abstract way. So I've got like an art school background.
All right, okay.
I'm film education,
right.
Lens-based media is all my thing.
Right, okay.
So I'm a dabbler. So as a young child, not so much, and then as I got to like early secondary school, that then took over and became my thing.
So it was a case of you finding the medium that you could then express yourself kind of in.
Yeah, I think so. My grandfather was he used to work for David Bailey, the photographer.
Oh yeah, okay.
He was a professional photographer for his whole life, and there was a point where that just kind of switched on for me, and I realized, oh, actually, that's something that I could really get behind. And actually, completely separate to him, I just kind of discovered this, and then sort of made this family link. So yeah, that was my in. Was I worked as a video producer for a long time, and like video and like moving images and taking pictures was always my thing.
One of the things and I've done videos, and obviously not in a very, very good way, because I did videos for a while and went, oh no, can't do that, I'll scare away I'll scare away small children, but it was the point I was scaring away big children, and then you had adults looking at my YouTube channel and just running away and going, shall we kill it with fire? But you kind of get this view that kind of like filming stuff and taking pictures and stuff is all kind of amazing and wonderful and gorgeous and beautiful things to do. But doing kind of processing videos is generally like, guess I'll go and put the kettle on again.
Yeah,
well, this
it
kind
takes
of
a long time.
Renders.
Yeah. Rendering and editing is huge. People do not realize how long that can take. And for me, like, there was such a distinctively different step when social media kicked in and we started having not just like cameras on our phones, but when we started being able to edit video on our phones.
Yeah.
And being able to basically cut out so much of the time it takes to take all of the clips off of a memory card,
and
put them onto your computer and load them into your software and then to render everything. And now I can literally film stuff, and that stuff I'm filming is literally already on my video editing, and I'm good. It's amazing.
So you can just have it automatically kind of almost like getting dumped into like a cloud situation, so you can then kind of find it on your computer and kind of start editing.
Yeah,
so,
like imagine painting, but you've already got the paints in the house, rather than going, oh, I really need fuchsia actually. Oh, can we go and buy some fuchsia?
I've got a fuchsia down here. I literally okay, there's a story, right? I got into my painting recently. I haven't painted for like 30 years. I had like Hero Quest when I was like I was going to say 15, 16. And then obviously I did my kind of Hulk smash with paintbrush kind of thing, and you had blob. Basically, barbarians kind of going, I can't even kind of hold this sword the way you've painted my fingers, unless I'm going to attach them with hot dogs. And so I came back, and recently I've been kind of diving back into the kind of the miniature painting, and then I was kind of like, somebody said, oh, you don't want to get the official brand of primer if you just go to like a popular kind of bicycle-based car shop. You can pick up kind of primer from there. And then I was in B&M, which is a treasure trove of just, you could go in, I mean, the stuff's cheap, but you can go in and you can spend an absolute fortune there. But I literally picked up like a pack of like acrylic paints, because I thought, well, the Citadel stuff I've got, that's acrylic. How different could this?
I've seen the word acrylic before. It's got to be the
acrylic. I'm sure I've owned like shirts that were slightly acrylic. So I kind of bought this kind of colourful rainbow set of acrylics, and I thought I could maybe try them on models. I haven't tried them on models yet, but there's definitely a fuchsia there. So I'm tempted to bling up my Space Marines and have like,
I love it.
Have
fuchsia
like
Marines.
9 of them, like in kind of like there are 9 of them in purple and gold, right? And then just one, just one that's accidentally put their armor in the wash with like a red sock. And I'm thinking of like just like having just this one Space Marine who is just in bright fuchsia, living the best life, and just like, so people would go, you've got 9 of these, and the 10th one looks like it fell into a sweet shop. I'm just, yes. And if you look, there's the kind of the Smarties.
Do Space Marines wear socks?
I would think.
Is anyone doing this research? Like, we need to get some people on it.
They're all arguing about whether or not you should have like women as Space Marines and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, right? If you took those big heavy metal boots off, are they hiking socks? Or, okay, Crocs.
Oh God!
For the Emperor, just charging against Tyranids, wearing a set of Crocs, right? Because they're breathable and they're practical.
Yeah, that's the thing.
You know,
if you're going to be wading through orc corpses all afternoon, you want something comfortable. You want something breathable. You want something that's going to be wiped clean, and the Croc probably is that. I
think socks you'd get trench foot. Whereas if you wore Crocs, I think, right, with your connections and my penchant for talking nonsense, we could ask them direct. I think we need to knock up on the front door and just go, look, where's the Space Marine Crocs? And if they take them on, we just make them.
We style them up. Mm-hmm. We take them to GW's headquarters where they've got the big Space Marine outside.
Yeah.
We put them on him, and then we start a protest, and we're there every day until they either get removed or they get put on every Marine.
I think we enter them into that painting competition. You know the one that was it called
the Golden Demon?
The Golden Demon. And it's just like, and what have you done? Because you do get people that kind of like they change, they kind of like do customizations, and it's just Space Marine after a hard day, and you've got like a towel. and holding a loofah. I mean, because loofahs exist, don't they? And he's just standing there, and normal armor all the way down, towel on the shoulder, maybe not a loofah, maybe a drink. And then the shoes are off, and underneath there's just these little feet with a set of kind of Crocs on them. I'd like to remind you at this point, Benji, that you said yes, that you'd come on the show.
Yeah, I did. And this is exactly why. Where were we?
The thing with it, right? The thing with the arts, the thing with any kind of creative industry, is that you get people that they go along like this through their career, and they just they make the career. They don't do anything what you would consider spectacular. For some reason, the difference between somebody who is like, say, a photographer and somebody who's a bricklayer is a bricklayer doesn't go and visit his parents, and his parents don't wonder when he's going to make it big and make this really impressive wall. Whereas I can imagine, depending on, you go, so you're not, working on anything kind of impressive at the moment. You're not photographing anything wonderful. You don't get anyone saying, so you didn't finish that expansion to the Sistine Chapel then? Not yet, Mum. Next week, I've put in some calls. But in terms of the creativity, when you graduated from and got your qualifications and your degree, was there a case of, did you have a career path planned, or was it a case of, where am I going to go with this? What am I going to do with this kind of thing?
No. Typically creative. Like I'm such a dabbler, and this is a huge common occurrence for me. Is like dipping my toe in lots of things, trying out stuff. And for me, that's what I did. Like I was freelancing for a long time, working for lots of different companies, doing lots of different projects, and just sort of seeing what fit. And you saying about taking the bricklayers wall back home and seeing what they say. For me, my dad's super into Formula One racing. He loves it. Yeah. And for one of my main contracts was for a company who did motorsport marketing and media, and I would work filming and making TV shows for this rallying thing.
Wow!
And I had a TV show on Amazon Prime that I had filmed it with a team of guys. I'd edited the show. My name was over it, and I got to take it home. And I didn't even need to take a disc to him. We loaded up on Amazon Prime.
Wow!
It was free. Don't get me wrong. It was free on Amazon Prime. It's not good, but it's
it's Amazon Prime. I mean.
And he couldn't have cared less. He could not have cared less. He's like, well, it's rallying. I don't actually like rallying. I like cars that are slightly lower to the ground and more expensive.
I would have went and taken them. My next film would have mean sneaking into the F1 paddock and setting fire to several of the cars, and then sending it to him and go, "Do you like those cars? Do you like them on fire?"
Writing his name in fuel.
Exactly. Saying, and see these gloves? Yeah, the ones I had you wear the other day? Yeah, those are your fingerprints. You're going to jail. And all you had to say was you liked my rally series. But is that kind of what happens, is that there's not, and I guess unless you're kind of getting involved even with getting into something like the BBC or something like that, everything seems to kind of be kind of outsourced, and there's kind of contracts and subcontracts. So you get a contract for like 6 months to film something, but then at the end of that 6 months, you're kind of like, I better check if my shirt still fits me, because I better check if I know how ironworks, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's actually how I ended up kind of here, is like the connectivity is something that I really enjoyed. Like the fact that you're there for 6 months means that you make really good connections with people, and it's all about making sure that you have the next thing lined up, and you meet people, and you see what project are you on next, and you have that kind of web of people, and you end up working on a lot of stuff. And that actually really suits the kind of job that I do for Osprey, which is specifically interacting with loads of people at like different ends of this kind of spider web.
So how did you get into your journey on the journey with Tabletop? My word, it's like X Factor, mate. But what came first? Your involvement in the tabletop industry, or secretly kind of moving stuff around a big bit of cardboard with dice and stuff?
Oh, it's definitely secretly moving things around the cardboard table. Actually, it's not even secret. I was very much the kind of person who, as a young teen, would be desperately corralling as many people to a dining room table as possible to move little plastic men around some cereal boxes. Or we've got this great idea for a role-playing game that is absolutely dreadful because instead of using dice, we're using spoons or whatever. That was definitely me as a teenager.
That sounds like a game idea.
Please, all ideas here are free to take. If I'm saying them out loud, it's because Osprey Games refuse to take my ideas. Apparently, cereal boxes and Space Marines isn't great.
I think, right, you have a game, but what it is it's like your kind of your ability to do a task is based around the number of spoons that you can balance on your face. So you kind of go, is this a 1 spoon thing? Is this a 2 spoon? Oh, he's gone for the 4 spoon. And you just have kind of like different spoons. I mean, they're not like silvery spoons, but they're slightly rubbery, so they would stick to your skin if you did. You just got to balance them properly.
Different sizes of spoons for different tasks. The more challenging the task, probably the smaller the spoon.
Different coloured spoons depending on the specialist skill.
Depending on the skill. Sometimes forks, if you've got a particularly challenging thing. Maybe a spork. Probably we'll start with a spork.
That just reminds me of one of my favourite, was it Terry Pratchett lines where he says he remembers going up there to spoon on on one occasion fork. So what kind of games were you? I mean, what kind of games were you into? Was it kind of like the role playing kind of war game type stuff, or?
I didn't really think about it, particularly as a teenager. It just kind of happened. I was playing. Obviously, everybody plays some amount of board games.
Yes.
I think mostly when you're, a kid or whatever. And I think I slipped into playing some 40k and other GW stuff when I was a teenager. Played a lot of Mordheim, loved Mordheim, but didn't really understand the connection between war games and board games. And then around that time, I then found this club back home, and I got invited to come and play D&D for the first time. And without realising the connectivity between roleplay games, war games, and board games, I just sort of slipped into all three of those things, but I didn't really connect them up. So I then sort of went through phases of like playing a lot of one specific game. And then when I went to university, I then just dove into everything and just kind of consumed as many different things as possible. So I hit all of them really. And I've got very specific tastes in all of them. But yeah, it just depends. Like I say, toe dipper.
Is there any stuff that you kept?
Oh
from
yeah,
kind of like university days. You got like a little treasure trove, your little retirement thing where you could say, well, actually, I've got the original 1993 version of this, which is worth.
Oh please, that's. So I often talk at work about Grail games, like the games that you're desperate to get, that are really hard to get hold of. And that runs concurrently for me, Grail games and games that you absolutely cannot get rid of. And there's this through line between them, because sometimes you have these games that you had as a kid, but you got rid of and you can't replace them.
Yes.
And either because they've you can't get hold of the things, or because they've upgraded the things. And for me, one of the things I cherish, along with all my original like Dungeons and Dragons books from like 3rd edition or whatever I'm playing, those are close to my heart. But I have a copy of the board game Grape Escape, where you move around a board with some Play-Doh men that get like squashed and cut up. Yeah. And I cannot ever get rid of that. And now that game still exists, but it's all the art's been upgraded and like it's officially licensed by Play-Doh. It's not the same thing. I need to have this crunchy, awful looking thing with all the old Play-Doh. Oh, it makes me so happy just to know that that's still there.
I think it was Justin DeWitt, or was it Keith? It might have been Keith Mateka I was speaking to about, hear me name drop. But we're talking about Escape from Atlantis.
Yeah.
And the original Waddington's Escape from Atlantis is literally probably in landfills everywhere, because it'll still exist. But it was like, it had these huge, crunchy, chunky plastic pieces for like the sea monsters and the boats. And the boats I remember the boats being plastic and having sails. And I remember them being sails because I think probably 90% of them got broken, and every single time I almost cried that when I kind of accidentally, except one time I did cry because I think I stood on it, and that was a kind of a painful thing. In terms of then getting into the industry, how did you venture in? Was it a contract thing? Were you kind of like doing side jobs, or was it kind of like...
So it was a side job thing for me.
Right.
I actually had a lot of friends who were sort of skirting around the edge of the industry. I had a lot of friends who, from that same D&D group and some of my wargame friends, who started writing for some publishers and sort of on the fringes of stuff. But when I was freelancing, one of my friends started working for a company called GamesQuest, who do a lot of fulfillment in the UK for Kickstarters.
I have spoken to Nigel.
Right.
Nigel.
So Nigel used to be my boss.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry about that. I'm not. I can. Every time I used to speak to Nigel, I used to rib him a bit. But I hope he's doing well. As far as I'm aware, as far as I'm aware, he's well. Yeah. But
So we. One of my friends I used to play D&D with. He started working for GamesQuest, and I did some video work for them. I started helping out at some conventions because they knew that I'm a people person. I love people, so I would start volunteering at conventions. And then I ended up becoming their social media person. They were working on a lot of CMON projects at the time.
Yes.
And they needed to kind of have a bit of a rebranding and a relaunch and try and basically increase their communications, because they were taking on so many different projects from people. And part of the job of being in fulfillment is kind of being this mediator between the actual publisher and the backer for Kickstarter. So they wanted somebody who could sort of help with that communication between the two and become sort of a public face. So I started doing that, and that just then kind of just bloomed into so many other different things, because I was able to meet people. Because obviously when you go to enough conventions, you work for a company who by its very nature interacts with lots of other companies.
Yes.
And you go back to that kind of web that I was talking about earlier.
It's kind of interesting, because I remember GamesQuest they went through a not a dark patch as some, because you could tell they'd taken on lots of projects. You could tell they were dealing with them. You could tell like a typical you could say technical company who weren't used to having a public face. It then became the case. It was like, oh, but you're dealing with board gamers, and everywhere through the entire process, they've done the Kickstarter. So they've been speaking to the designer developer. They're now wanting to speak to the people who are doing the fulfillment. And I think sometimes what happened with GamesQuest was it was like, but we don't, they're not our customer. It's like the guys that we're speaking to, they're not our customer. It's not the person, it's not Johnny who's ordered who's ordered Ank or whatever. He's not our customer. It's actually, but then I think what happened is it realized, and I think they do it now on a regular basis, is the kind of the updates. And I think everybody, I think Spiral Galaxy do it. I certainly know that GamesQuest do it. It's now become a case that we're providing a service. We're not necessarily your public-facing company, but they now have to kind of like do a weekly kind of update on Facebook to say, this is what's going out, this is what's coming up, and here's the projects that we're currently kind of working on.
So I actually started that, mate. That was me. So I started all that stuff because they were, like you say, there was this shift of gears because Kickstarter suddenly started taking in so many more people than ever before.
Yes.
And then because of that, because the audience grew so much, there was so much more demand, then more publishers jumped on board, and Kickstarter absolutely boomed, which was excellent. And because Kickstarter boomed, it meant that fulfillment then followed suit.
Yeah.
And when fulfillment followed suit, we then were in this era of like, okay, well, I can now speak to any of these game designers about their game on social media. I can just speak with them.
Yeah.
So if something hasn't turned up or it's wrong, then I can just speak with them. But obviously, that communication then needs to follow suit with every part of the chain.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was a really interesting time. It was really challenging, but it was really exciting, and it was great to be part of that like huge growth as well, and to see kind of the inside of how Kickstarter does stuff. Like seeing how the sausage is made, I think, is absolutely fascinating. That's something that the idea of like playing with a finished board game is super exciting. But knowing how many steps that's gone through, and how many different people have touched that product, how many different people have specifically, carefully had a tiny little bit of love put into it, that's what excites me.
Yeah. You stayed at Games Quest for a while. Was it right in saying you went to Osprey after Games Quest, or did you go somewhere else between there?
Yeah, so I was working with them. I finished with them right at the beginning of the pandemic because they had a big shake around because obviously people are going to be working from home.
Yeah.
I was freelancing at that time. And then one of my friends had messaged me and said, "Oh, I saw this thing. It looks exactly like something that you would apply for," which was this job at Osprey Games. And I was kind of surprised because I'd never looked to myself as a marketing person before. Up until that point, I'd been sort of skirting around it because I'd considered myself as a video producer first and foremost.
Yeah.
But realized that as part of the videos that I was like, I'd made videos for Kickstarter and I had worked on a social media campaign that included videos, but I was so video focused that I'd forgotten that actually I was doing marketing plans for stuff and I was writing copy that goes with stuff and I was making press releases and all of that stuff was exactly what I needed to then work with Osprey.
And Osprey's in a kind of a slightly, what you would say is maybe a slightly different position than a lot of board game publishers because they are a publisher and they've got a big publishing thing behind them. Yeah. So you're moving away from kind of like being in a salesy type role if you're working with Kickstarter to all of a sudden actually doing, well, how do we kind of get how do we get the word kind of out there?
Yeah.
Does the work at Osprey, does it still allow you to go out and kind of, I guess, Benji the world? You still get the opportunity to go out and speak to people and see people and things like that.
Yeah, I feel hugely fortunate to have the job that I do. Like, we're at quite a specific window of the industry where there are so many publishers which are just a one-person band who is, making their first game or the first couple of games. Their thing goes on Kickstarter and they'll foster one project for a long time. And then obviously the other end of that, you have this tiny number of companies like your Fantasy Flights, your Hasbros, who are just pumping out product. They're working on these absolute behemoths. And there's this small window in between that I feel like Osprey Games fits in of companies who have full-time staff like myself.
Yeah.
And we're able to be slightly more agile than the big behemoths who are trying to steer a ship with like Marvel and Star Wars properties.
Yeah.
But also we've got a bit more clout to us than say someone who's making miniatures in their own garage or whatever. So we're kind of sitting in that in between bit, and it's really exciting because there's very few companies who do that, and it means that we have consistent releases that are coming out. But it means that we still get to have a lot of that creativity and the freedom to make stuff and do exciting things because we work for we're an imprint of a book publisher. We work for Bloomsbury Publishing.
Yes.
So basically they look at us and they're like, these guys are really weird because we don't understand the products they're making. They're not this shape and they don't have like 300 pages. They've got like 20 pages, but they don't make any sense because they're all talking about dice and rulers. And then with the book comes like hundreds of tiny pieces of wood and cardboard. So it means that we're given a bit of freedom to then be like, don't worry guys, we've absolutely got this. We can take it from here. We know what we're doing. And then we can go out and we can kind of, make cool videos, or we can, travel around and do different conventions and stuff.
Yeah. And
we can kind of be a bit freer than the other arms of the business that are just doing specific like book fairy kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's great because they trust us to actually know what we're doing, and they really invest in people who are passionate about their hobbies. And it's really cool because we get to work with other people who are super passionate about tabletop stuff.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting that one of the things that I noticed that Osprey Games hasn't kind of gone down is they haven't gone down the kind of the getting as many IP as possible. And I mean, even games like, say, like Wildlands.
Yeah.
Now, Wildlands to me, I love Wildlands. It's like, it's one of my, really like it. But at the same time, it's one of these games you can say, oh, I can imagine if you got this IP on it or this kid's IP on it, or if you got like, but you don't, you did it with like, I think one of the kind of the Wildland variations, which was like Judge Dredd, I think it was Helter Skelter. Yeah. And that was the only time I seen you kind of dip in and say, right, we've taken one of our core products and done that. Do you think that kind of, as you said, it gives you kind of like the freedom to kind of not, it kind of gives you that freedom that you're not having to manage people's expectations. I can imagine that when Helter Skelter went out there with Judge Dredd, there would have been, 4 or 5 2000 AD fans that went, actually, I think you'll find that his badge is the wrong way around and that he doesn't use his gun like that and there's no way that he kills, in Mega City you'll find it's got the wrong artist there and this is the contemporary time. But you're not, whereas you look at, say, the Undaunted series, apart from kind of like the historical accuracy that you rely, obviously, on Trevor and David to bring to the table, you're not kind of, I guess you're not kind of like, there's not somebody kind of standing over you, just kind of like waggling their finger to say, well, you're not being entirely kind of accurate with that.
Yeah, it means that we can play with something, a world that a creator has made, but we don't have quite as much bureaucracy as if you've got these absolute behemoths of IP that you need to be very carefully checking through so many layers. We have played around with IP a little bit, like you say, with like things like Judge Dredd and stuff. Yeah. But I think where we have that accuracy for us comes from our the military history background of like Osprey Publishing.
Yeah,
we have a lot of people in house who have all of that knowledge of like, this is the exact tank that you're looking for the cover of this, or this is the rifle that whatever.
Yeah.
And because we have that background of those experts who can bring that accuracy to what we're doing, it gives a sense of authenticity, but also at the end of the day, we're still making something that is somewhat fictionalized, right? Like Undaunted Stalingrad, for example, like the idea of that game is that you get to have your own narrative that plays around with the core idea of the actual history of Stalingrad and what happened to that city. But you have a fictionalized version of it with narrative that weaves into it. So it's that mixing of fantasy with and fiction and non-fiction, I guess is a better way of putting it, means that there's loads of stuff that we can do, and it means that we aren't just absolutely beholden to whoever owns the rights to, like you say, Judge Dredd or whatever. And it's cool because obviously we want to have accuracy because fans and community are a huge important part of any kind of media, but especially games, because you're living in those worlds. You're actually spending hours and hours thinking about those characters, or spending hours painting or modeling or doing something, because that to you is accuracy. So I think a lot of what we do is to try and make sure that we're as accurate as the fans want us to be, but also give people space to grow and do stuff. Like I work with Joe McCullough on like Stargrave and Oathmark and those games. Though, like, seeing the creativity of his Facebook communities to me is wild, because you'll see on one end people will be wanting to make these like perfect Star Wars recreations, and they'll make their Stargrave crew that looks exactly like Star Wars characters. And on the other hand, you'll see people who are like kit bashing together things that you couldn't even dream of and making these wild creations. And those two things can exist in the same game, and that's awesome. The fact that we can build a community that can work for both of those kinds of player is great.
And I guess that the other thing is as well is that, are you able then to kind of like bring in your ideas? I mean, when you're having discussions with things, is it quite, because I can imagine that the things with kind of any kind of creative endeavor is that somebody could say, you could maybe save some time if you take a pencil into space instead of spending all this money on this pen kind of thing. But is it sometimes you could just like, well, this kind of doesn't make kind of any sense, because I imagine you have the fans and somebody says, well, I've created this entire world because of the way that this holster is attached to this gun, and that is the materials and that's where the planet comes and blah, 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 blah. But then for someone like yourself, are you able to say, when you work, you're mentioning you're working with people involved in Stargrave, are you able to say, well, what about this or what about that, or as well?
That's and that's the interesting thing about where we are in the marketing department is like, because we're this middle-sized company, there are multiple eyes and people touching any of our games. So instead of there is one person who writes the game who then publishes it, we have multiple layers that goes from, designer through to our development team. Our development team will pass that to production, and then marketing will touch that. So there's all these different pieces of the puzzle, and all of those are different sets of eyes who all have very different interests and experiences. So it means that we'll get to touch something and be like, oh, have you thought about adding this? And exactly like you say, being able to go, oh, I might be the first person who's looked at this who has experience in this specific thing. Yeah. Could you change this? Like, I worked on some RPGs last year. Yeah. And I got to be one of the first people to actually like GM those RPGs, because once that's all ready to go, that comes up to us. And then once we play them and get them on the table, we can say, oh, like, have you thought about adding this thing? And they're like, oh yeah, actually, because it's just some words, we can add that on before it goes out the door, which is great.
I suppose it's just it's a question of, I guess, pressing Control and A on a particular paragraph and deleting it and going, actually, just attack them with a bacon, you'll be fine. And just kind of,
I wish it were that simple.
Leaving it like that. I had a discussion with Chris from the Tabletop.
Chris Eggett?
Chris Eggett,
Yeah.
And
rest in peace, Chris. He left his job yesterday, I think.
He did leave his job yesterday. Yeah. Long, God bless him and all that's sailing.
Rest in power, Chris.
Rest in power. He should have. I tell you what, if that was the case, the Ravagers would turn up and put on a light show. I watched that. Yeah. But we were talking about Chris is, but we were talking about kind of like address books, and it was like who would have the most interesting kind of address book. And I was like saying, well, I've spoken to blah, 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 blah. I've like over the last 7 years, I've kind of, it's okay. And then he would say, well, I've spoken to blah, 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 blah. And then Ben Maddox came in, and Ben Maddox is obviously, he's spoken to like probably every kind of big name. But then I'm thinking your address book must be pretty cool, because you've got a lot of the kind of the, let's face it, you've got Shut Up and Sit Down. I've seen them kind of talking about kind of your products. I've seen No Pun Included. My question for you is, right, so you've got these big guys and they've got the numbers, and if you send them a game and if they like the game, it's going to help with the sales. Have you ever kind of thought about doing an Emperor Palpatine and kind of went unlimited power, and then just like went, sorry, Quince, but I just don't think, just don't think you're going to get the numbers on this one, so we're going to give it to somebody else. Just as a joke, just to see.
I think I would be fired. If that were the case. I think, because, those what I love about Shut Up and Sit Down is that they will cover stuff that they want to cover. Yes. I love that they won't just cover everything that gets sent their way. And that's awesome. I think being able to have that kind of power, obviously they're afforded that because they have so many views and stuff, but it means that they're able to be real tastemakers, which is really something in an industry where there's obviously so many people keen on like covering stuff. But I think the problem is if I didn't send them stuff, they would probably also come knocking.
I can just imagine it's like, is it maybe not, is it potentially a litmus test? Because I know that there's obviously, it's like the Dice Tower and things like that. I know, and I know Mike Delisio quite well, who works on the Dice Tower, and he just says like literally like they could open the front door of the Dice Tower every day, and it has to be a tower because of how high they have to stack the games. And they just open it, and they've just got delivery after delivery kind of coming in. And I wonder, in terms of kind of litmus test, if you said, hey Quince, how's it going? Or hey Tom, how's it going? Are you interested in looking at general orders? And if they turned round and says, I've kind of looked at it, but it's not really our bag. I wonder if you report that back, does that then have them go, oh, they're not interested in it? Why not?
But that's an excellent point though, because not every game is for every person.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I think we got really lucky because Quinn's really likes Undaunted because he's a card game player. He's like me. He's an old Netrunner player, and he's played a lot of Magic and stuff. So that is the kind of thing that he's into. But for example, like I'm trying to think of something, like if we sent them like some really chunky, very, very dry, abstract, heavy Euro, they're much less likely to cover it, and because it's not their thing. They like to play stuff that's going to be a card game or a dexterity game or something doing something creative. But that doesn't mean that there isn't an audience for that game. You just need to find whoever that person is that is into those games, right?
Mm-hmm. I asked this question of a previous guest about in relation to new creators reaching out to yourselves. Now, I had a shoe in, I'll admit it, because I had Turtsy.
A croc.
when you have the croc of the industry, which is David Turtsy, you just chuck it at people and you just let in. But I understand, but on another episode, when I was asking Julius, what's going to make you what kind of information does a new creator need to send you to make you think, actually, I might engage? Because I imagine you could just, as you say, you've kind of like, hey, Quinns, I bet you when you type an email, I bet you just press Q and it automatically...
it autofills.
You have to make sure. It's like I accidentally sent out for some Egyptian cotton, and I was going to send it to the Queen of the Nile at gmail.com, and I accidentally sent 7 rolls to Quinn instead. But
he'd think it was kind of like a viral marketing campaign kind of thing.
It's like, what am I going to do with all this Egyptian? I'm sure he'd love it. He'd probably wear it in a video.
Make curtains. Yeah.
He'd probably actually wear it in a video, wear curtains and everything like that. But anyway, going back.
So like, what's a good way to reach out to us?
Yeah.
So I have a huge contact list. But I think it's really helpful for people to just show us what the connections are, because we have a lot of people who reach out who will just be like, hey, we're interested in doing some coverage. And you're like, that's great, but I have no idea who you are.
Yeah.
So we like to work with people who are talking in interesting ways. Obviously, if you've got a following of a certain size, that's really helpful. But also, if you're talking about things or to a different audience that we might not have seen, that's really, really cool. We get a lot of people who reach out who'll be like, oh, I might only have like a couple of thousand followers on Twitter or whatever, but we'd be interested in covering your stuff because we really love small box party games. And we're like, oh, that's great. Yeah. My list for small box party games is quite small. And then you look and you're like, oh, these people are from a specific country that I've not spoken to, or they're working for a magazine I've never heard of. Yeah. So we're always looking to diversify that list and try and get just a big range of people on. And there's, like I said earlier, there's kind of different games to different people, and it's the same thing for reviewers. We specifically like working with people who obviously can also be communicative back. So it really helps if people who reach out are able to send me links, make sure that they're tagging stuff correctly, like just some basic kind of digital etiquette stuff, just so that so that there's visibility. I think a lot of people don't understand that if you tag someone, you just become more visible. They might make a review of something and then they don't put the product name in it, or they don't tag the company or whatever, and it just gets lost in the ether. And I think actually podcast is a really interesting thing, right? Because podcast as a medium is something that isn't very easily searchable. If you aren't putting stuff in the metadata, in the title, in the copy for the podcast, it won't get found. Like, you could put my name in this, but if you don't put Osprey Games, then maybe it will just disappear and no one will find it. But there are kind of different levels of that, because YouTube videos, for example, are slightly more searchable because we've got closed captions and stuff with them. More people, like I can get thumbnails and stuff out of them. The YouTube algorithm will find and bubble stuff up to the surface because they'll know that someone who watched one Shut Up and Sit Down video will then find another, and so on. But then, like, compared to like written blogs, for example, people who do like old school, just like full text reviews. If I type in like I'm looking for a review of the latest game I'm making a campaign for, I can find that immediately because Google knows exactly what I want. So there's this kind of odd skewing, like where in our marketing team we spend more time trying to dig and find stuff in the mediums that are harder to search, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Why do you think with the kind of the tabletop kind of industry kind of growing, Critical Role seems to kind of be out there, and there's a lot of people that, you go to like Apple Podcasts and I look and they're like, they should literally just call themselves #1.Critical Role, because the number of times I see them kind of up the number one.
Yeah.
But at the same time, why do you think we don't see a lot more coverage kind of in the kind of the media? Because what the reason
more
for
mainstream stuff.
Yeah, I mean, what I see is I constantly see, and it's really, really funny, I constantly see kind of people kind of putting out critiques, or people, experts talking with kids, talking about kids and what kids can do and how parents can interact with their kids. And I don't see them turning around and going, here's a game. Here's a game you can play with kids. It's a fantasy-based setting where you kind of collect jewels and you fight each other, and it's card-based and it's language dependent, so you don't necessarily have to have, a brilliant kind of reading age. But I'm always surprised that there isn't that kind of reach. I don't know, and I'm kind of perplexed considering that we're getting kind of Kickstarters that are going into their millions now. That something like Frosthaven, for instance, isn't something that's kind of covered on the kind of the if we're still niche, I guess.
Yeah. So at Christmas, I know that Dan from Senate Magazine had an article in The Guardian, for example, of like 10 games to play with your kids this Christmas kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that was huge because like taking some hobby stuff and being able to get that into like a mainstream newspaper is like that's a chink in the armor that's found that you can get through, right?
Yeah.
And I think that seeing sites like places like Critical Role and stuff being able to jump between media and seeing shows like Vox Machina, and seeing some of that stuff, I think slowly start to seep into the public consciousness, I think is a huge step. I think so much of it, my guess, is that the idea of mainstream media is built around what mainstream media itself deems to be the average viewer or reader. And they're for things like newspapers, for example, you're likely to skew more middle class if you're looking at something like The Guardian, and therefore you then take this very specific kinds of demographic. And I think they don't see the gaming hobby itself as being part of what those core demographics are yet. And I think that's largely going to continue to keep changing as more of our geek culture kind of seeps into that. And as we start to get a bit older, because by the time that our generation are retired, that will have had such a long-lasting impact across the decades that I think there'll be this long trail of stuff that's out there. But don't forget, media is such a huge boom because like the digital revolution has absolutely like just pumped it full of adrenaline. Like there's more music made in the last 10 years than in the last 100 years. There's so much stuff out there. Same for board games. And I think we are still a hobby, but we're not necessarily a hobby that's particularly palatable if you're trying to make a newspaper that wants to talk about like, here's a lovely dinner to cook on a Sunday afternoon, or like or if you're like ITV News and you're wanting to do a package about like let's talk about sport, or there's still a kind of niche to it, and I think we will always have that because we like it. Unfortunately, we love gatekeeping ourselves. We're dreadful at it.
We are. But
that's what hobbies are, right?
I think the other thing is as well is I think there's nothing more boring than saying, and these guys, there's about 4 of them, they kind of got together and they played a couple of games, unusual ones, and during the conversation, one of them, they ended up having a kind of a positive interaction in relation to one of their mental health kind of issues. And it's kind of like, that's not news. They don't want that. What they want is 4 people round the table, kind of, we're playing Burn the Puppy game. We're chucking, and it's encouraging them to do kind of like,
how many backers have you got for your Kickstarter?
6
for Burn the Puppy? You got
6. 6.
Yeah, they're all at the VIP tier though, right? So you're probably gonna make.
It's money laundering. I mean, that's
right. Okay.
I mean, like it's like, it was either that or it was like selling my artwork at the local kind of art fair, which is
old-fashioned money laundering.
Which is also called, it's a series of portraits with various cute animals in liquidizers, and the entire thing is called Fluffy to Red. And surprisingly enough, got asked to leave after making several kind of people cry. I mean, not actually any animals were hurt. I don't know what the problem is with it, but some people just don't appreciate art.
People will be screaming right now because there is, isn't there like an exploding kittens game that's called like Kittens in a Blender or something? I'm sure that that's a game.
That's definitely
just... the fact that we've covered like everything is a game.
Everything is literally a game. Yeah. I was like going to say something, and then I realized that was the wrong thing to say. So I'm glad, but now you're going to wonder what I was going to say.
Get him out the blender.
I was going to say, what's turning your head in the world of cardboard just now, Mr. Darcy?
The over the shoulder meme looking.
Exactly.
So it's a great segue. So I've got loads of stuff because I love something that's novelty. Like I mentioned Grape Escape earlier because it's got this like thing about Play-Doh, right? So I love novelty. But also I think part of the reason I love novelty is because I like seeing how designers are innovating on something.
Yes.
And not only that, but where developers are willing to put money behind it and take a risk on working something into more of a mainstream product and a game that other people will see. Because it's all well and good making like this niche thing as a designer and like 10 people see it. It's different when it gets out there, right? So, for example, off the top of my head, really looking a lot into non-combat war games. Like I fell into a Discord recently when I was at Salute. That was this whole Discord devoted to peaceful wargaming and what wargaming could be if you're, instead of fighting each other, you're herding sheep. And I saw this game, I can't remember the designer's name and I should be able to name drop it, but Herding 28. It's about herding sheep or other creatures.
Yeah.
And then other people saw that design and were like, cool, what if we were picking apples, or what if we were fishing, and stuff like that just blows my mind of like, there's so much creativity of people out there.
Votes for women.
Because
Votes for women.
And that being in the War Games category for the Golden Geek Awards was awesome. That's so cool. Like that, it's great that we're. I mean, obviously, I wanted Stalingrad to win because that was my game there. But seeing stuff like that is awesome. Like, I'm running tomorrow night. I'm running a game of Dread, the RPG that uses a Jenga tower instead of dice. So like stuff like that, like when I see somebody who's putting out something, like you spoke about Alice is Missing previously, I think. Stuff like that, and you're like, whoa, hang on, wait, we don't need to use these dice, but I've got so many D&D books that what? And you can take something that's so small and just turn it into something really exciting. That's the stuff that really switches me on.
I played the Honey Heist.
Oh the one page.
The one page thing where it's like literally it's like you can either decide to be more gangster or more bear, but you can't continue to be totally a gangster because otherwise you turn into a gangster, and you can't continually go into being more bear because otherwise so the actions were just literally kind of going between these two things. And it was like there's two things you're like, this is so simple, and it's like the other thing is, why hasn't anybody kind of thought about this before? And it was the same with when David and Trevor were talking about general orders. I'll get the name right. I kind of must have butchered that name about under orders, following orders, through orders, past orders, and it's like, no, it's general orders. All right, but they were saying, oh, it's a worker placement kind of war game, and I'm just like going, it's a what? It's a how?
When that hit my desk, I immediately started frantically Googling because I assumed that the claim of worker placement war game. It's one of the first worker placement war games. That must have been done before. No. And all I found were loads of threads of other people saying, not really. Is this one? Not really. Well, does this count? No, it's kind of not a war game, actually. And like David's found there's something that I think hit Kickstarter in the last year that's kind of a similar cross between the two.
Yeah.
But there's not much out there, and it's so exciting to know that, like, what does the future hold? What more design space is there to be carved out?
Is it also the case that you've kind of got to keep Stum as well, that you'll be part of the process, and like, you know, because on the episode, apart from me butchering that name, there was also that part was like, can we talk about it? It's like, I don't know. It's like, I don't care. It's like, you talk, you know. But is a part where you're like kind of going, this is so exciting, yeah, but you haven't seen what's coming up next, and it's going to be even more exciting, and this is kind of where it's going. So you must be obviously working into your marketing plan, what you're going to be looking at, what's going to be coming up, what people are going to be, because you've got the new, you've got the follow-up to Merv coming out later on.
Spiritual successor is what we're calling it.
The spiritual, it's the same.
It just sounds fancier.
It's the same palette.
Yeah, it's the same color palette.
It's the same color palette. And I was just like, I like the color palette.
Yeah.
It's like, why do you like the game? I like the. There's a big stretch between I like camels and I like the color palette. That's kind of like that is obvious. So that's another kind of RPG game. Do you become more like a camel, or do you become more like the color palette? I don't know. That looks kind of exciting to me, and I'm kind of interested to see kind of what happens to that. But again, that's one of these things, is it's kind of out there and the name's out there, but how much kind of information out there is a completely different thing altogether.
Yeah, like I should probably name drop it. Sankore, Pride of Mansa Musa. Yeah, it's really exciting because we have obviously quite a lot of track laid out in front of us for marketing. We work, give or take, about a year in advance for like locked stuff, so I know what our next year's worth of releases are.
Yeah, and
then we have sort of about half a year in front of that we're kind of scoping and know. So it means that when I'm working on stuff, for example, working on Merv and then Sankore, I've then got to be very careful that I don't start talking about the next thing down the road, that, you know, maybe we're working on another Euro, like, don't mention that.
Yeah.
But also, it's interesting because you have a lot of irons in the fire, and it's about trying to keep them all going at the same time. But also, you're checking what everybody else knows. So, for example, with general orders is a good example to talk about. Like, I've obviously got loads of images of the game. We've got playtests of the game. We know all this information, like the rulebook and stuff. But that stuff isn't public, right? Like, it's not on BGG. So we try and use Board Game Geek as our kind of litmus test for what is public knowledge, so that we can track what is out there.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when you're working on so many products and so far ahead, it's quite easy to forget that actually, no, wait, this was a surprise. Like, people didn't know that.
Yeah.
Like Stalingrad, for example, when we were working on Undaunted Stalingrad, we had loads of surprises. Like, we made a point of saying to reviewers, please don't talk about the campaign and what happens.
Yeah.
We'd like to keep some of the cards that evolve or the characters that can die. Like, we want to keep that a surprise. But also there was a point where it was like, oh, when are we going to tell everybody that actually you can destroy buildings and they never come back? When are we going to tell them that? Like, but that was on the back of the box. Like, we'd put stuff out on the back of the box. So, like, if people are careful, we are occasionally slipping up and things will go out. But also, we make a point of trying to seed some stuff that's out there. So, like, if you watch the videos that I make, sometimes we'll put stuff in the background, or if you pause on the cards, you'll get a spoiler of, like, some of the stuff that's coming up.
Yeah.
And we can then see, like, how excited people are for the game, because it will hit BGG and people will be like, okay, I paused on this page of someone flipping through the rule book for Battle of Britain, and I can see that there's a scenario that's got like this exact kind of ship in it, and like it's so cool, but it's also scary to be like, oh god, I need to make sure that I check everything so carefully.
It's like when people, it's like people watching like a Marvel trailer or something like that. You'll get people that'll pause it and they'll go, right, that is their uniform, or that is their armor. And I remember there was the Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness kind of thing, and people were going, when they tried to kind of release those stills of like Captain Britain and stuff like that, and people were going, it's Tom Cruise. It's like, it's not Tom Cruise, it's this person, it's not. You know what I mean? It's Dorothy out of Golden Girls. She's come back. You know, but so there you go. So that's, so it's all good fun and all good things. Now, if people have listened along tonight and they're wondering where they can pick up their 40k ultramarine Crocs. No, but
you can join us. We're going to be picketing outside Games Workshop headquarters.
There's going to be a Discord, because you have to have it. There's going to have a Discord with me.
Everyone's got a Discord.
I've not.
Have you not?
No, right? Okay. See, the thing with Discord, right, is it's like if you had a 40th birthday party and I didn't. And what happens if you invited a whole load of people along and then just you kind of made too many sausage rolls because nobody turned up? And my thing with a Discord is, first of all, right, I'm one of these people that gets kind of fixated on stuff. So if I did a Discord, then I'd be going in and I'd be going like 100% Discord. And then 6 months in, I'd be going, I've now got 1,000 people to look after. Because I did such a good job of bringing all these 1,000 people in, and now I've got to kind of keep them happy forever. So I don't have a Discord. But does Osprey Games have a Discord?
We actually, we're in exactly the boat that you've just described. So we have a Discord, but it's a Discord that we don't. We basically laid out the table, and then people started coming in, and then we were like, oh, actually, we've got a lot of other things to be cooking. So we use our Discord for roleplay games mostly, and we've still got some people sort of bubbling stuff there, because our designers check in with that, so they're able to kind of speak with their community. And we use it around shows sometimes. So we built them in one of the lockdowns when all the like UK Games Expo, is it going to have an online version? Maybe we're doing UK Games Expo at home, or so we started doing some of that with Discord because it was a really good platform. But it's unfortunately quite closed doors, right? Like what I was saying earlier about podcasting being quite hard to find stuff.
Yes,
there's so many of them, but also, how do I know if at minute 32 you're going to talk about Arc Nova? I want to listen to Arc Nova. How do I know? But Discord's the same, right? Like if you know the person already, you can find their Discord. But if you don't, it's a closed room that you don't even know it exists. Exactly, in a dungeon somewhere. So I think it's quite easy to try and think that you're going to have a community when you don't. But then actually, sometimes people just have these communities bloom out of nowhere. You choose one platform, I think. That's my current image. Like, choose one platform and work that really well. Like, I loved Twitter. That was my baby. We had some great times on Twitter. That's where everyone was. And now we're going to figure out where that is, and it's not Twitter. But it's hard. Like if you're trying to be creative and just out there communicating with your audience, finding where your audience is hard enough. But also trying to joggle your audience who might be on a bit on Facebook and a little bit on Instagram, and a little bit on YouTube comments, or it can be really tough.
Yeah,
it's a lot of time. It's time consuming.
I end up doing. I think that's why people do cross posting. They have they're kind of like, this is my main platform, and I love this platform, and I even check if this platform is fed and watered. Then I have these other platforms that I'll just throw them some breadcrumbs just to make them think that they're getting fed and watered, but actually, make them feel a little bit of love. So with that in mind, if people are looking to find you and Osprey, where do you exist on the internet webs? Where's the best place to find you?
Talking of platforms to find us, you can find us at Osprey Games pretty much everywhere. You can find us on our website, ospreygames.co.uk, where we've got an excellent blog that I'll point people to with design diaries and cool stuff. We've also got loads of free resources for our games, so that's my big plug, because people should use the free resources. They're wicked. Free scenarios for Undaunted and stuff. But we are also talking with people on Instagram. We're starting up various other platforms now. We're trying to work out what happens post Twitter, but we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, all those things at Osprey Games.
There you go. And what we'll do is we'll make sure that we put those links in the show notes so that we've got notes to show. If you want to keep an eye on what we're up to, you know what to do. Go to Google, search for We're Not Wizards. You'll find us in all the different places, worn out faces, bright and early for the daily races. We're on Twitter and Instagram. And we've got our blog, which is We're Not Wizards, tabletop.com. You can find our podcast, We're Not Wizards.com, or you can find it on Apple, and you can find it on Overcast and Undercast and, you know, Fishing Cast and whatever cast, you know, just casting out, wherever. If you have liked what you've listened to tonight, and you should, because Benji is awesome, please go to your podcast catcher of choice and give us a rating or a review. If you are going to be giving us a rating or review, don't give us 10 stars because you don't want to make us big-headed, but at the same time, don't give us no stars because it will make us cry.
Oh.
We're a couple of ugly criers. I'm just going to...
This is where I'll jump in. Go. If you're on Spotify now has a star rating. Very few people know that. Go on Spotify and you can rate your podcast. Go and rate this because this deserves all of your stars. That's where I would put them.
Thank you very much.
That's where I put my stars.
Yes. And make sure you keep us humble, keep us average. But the person who's not been average, rather wonderful, rather fantastic, Benji Corless. Thank you, Benji.
Thank you. This has been great. You're the best.
There's only 2 more things to do. The first thing is to remember that we're many things, but we're not wizards. Are we wizards, Benji?
I'm also not a wizard.
Yes. Is it secret? Is it safe? Fool of a took.
Oh.
And the other thing is to say goodbye. So it's goodbye from Benji. Say goodbye, Benji.
Goodbye, Benji.
And it's a goodbye from me. Remember, stay safe. Roll 6s and make something awful. And until the next time, if you're gonna pray, make it Osprey. Goodbye.
A wizard is never late. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.